and welcome to this recording on using pivot tables in Excel. So pivot tables are really handy when you want to analyse a data set, particularly when you want to count things up, see how many that you've got of a particular series of data. So in front of me I've got some pretend data. I've got a client ID, a customer type which is kind of completely made up, towns that they live in, counties that they live in, country, postcode, email data protection which you might have within your database, the date that customer was created, and the last sale date. So the first thing that you need to do when you create a pivot table is to make sure that all of these columns are named. So there needs to be something in A1, B1, etc. up to I1. I'll show you an example of what happens if you don't have one of them named. So that's the first step. Once they're all named, select all the data. I just click between the A and the 1 on the little black triangle here in the top left corner. And then I say Insert Pivot Table. Comes up with a menu, and it can be a bit intimidating at first. And basically you just press OK. And that takes you to the next stage in the process. So your pivot table's there ready to use, but it doesn't show you anything right now. First of all, you need to tell it what to count. So you either want to count something or sum something. So I want to count something. I want to count how many customers there are, and I'm going to use the unique customer number to do that. So you can see immediately that it's counted how many client IDs there are, and there are 218,651. Not very interesting in itself, because obviously you could just scroll down to the bottom of the data to see that. But what you can now do is drag and drop each of these fields into different places. So I'm going to drag customer type into my rows. And now I can see that I've got 1,274 active customers, a lot of inactive customers. I've got some large volume customers and some new customers. So obviously this will depend on your database and what information you've got within there. But it just essentially enables you to analyse the data very, very quickly. So if I want to use that, maybe I want to chart that or do some percentages, then the easiest thing to do is to copy that data, just using Control-C, open a new tab, use the paste menu and paste values. So that's the 1, 2, 3. In older versions of Excel, all this is possible, it just the menu looks slightly different. So I've got my raw data now. It hasn't brought the pivot table over. If you copy and paste without pasting values, it sometimes brings the whole pivot table over, which you don't want. And then you can do things like pop some percentages in. So I'm going to put some dollar signs in here. Hopefully you're familiar with this. This is to fix that cell so that when I drag the formula down, it moves the B5, but not the B7. And I could put some percentages on there. And you could go from there, chart it up, so you know that 94% of this database are inactive customers. So you might want to look at archiving that data and maybe kind of starting with the fresher, newer customers. So that's a very quick introduction to how you do the pivot table. I'm going to show you a few more things. One thing to bear in mind is that by creating a pivot table, you're making the file size very big, particularly if you've got a lot of Excel rows. So I could call this chart data, and I know this is my pivot table. And when you end up with all the chart data you want, you might just want to right click, delete the pivot table, save the file and close it. You can always recreate a pivot table at any time. It will just make the file quicker to run if you don't have pivot tables within your file all the time. A couple of other things that we can do with this. So I might want to look at filtering this on current customers. So I've got a client created date, and I could use a drop down menu here. So I just moved the client created date into the filters thing on the right hand side of the screen there. And then I can come over here and use a drop down menu and say select multiple items. I could actually just type the year in. So just 2008 customers I want to look at. And that will redo all my data for just 2008 customers. So it's a really, really handy technique. Let's do a couple more. So I'm going to, when you're finished with stuff, just drag it and drop it outside that grid. If we look at customer type, we could look at town. And you can see that town needs a lot of neatening up. March isn't a town that I know of. So there's perhaps quite a lot of data within here. You can see it's a mix of UK and global records. So you might want to kind of go into this and do some neatening. And once you've got all of those results, again, you can copy and paste values into a new tab, or you can just drag and drop it out. So I might want to look at country in the same way. So country is looking a little bit neater, so I could go through country and look at whether there's any typos, anything that needs neatening up. Postcode is going to be tricky because there's going to be a lot, as you can see. It's taking a while to run. And probably at an individual postcode or zip code level, there's too much data. You know, you're getting 11111, things like that aren't that interesting. So one of the things that you can do within pivot tables, or relating to pivot tables, I guess, is go back into your data and make it easier for the pivot table to understand. So these are all probably US zip codes. So let's come down to some UK postcodes. So UK postcodes tend to have the format, they have a number and 2 letters at the end, and then from the right they have a space, and then on the left hand side of the postcode they either have 3 or 4 digits. So I actually want to just get to the AB22s and see how many those are to look at the postcode sectors. So I'm going to come over to my main data, and I want to do something where I split this data into cells. So I'm actually going to copy this over here and paste it because I want to keep the original postcode as well. And then I'm going to use this data menu, text to columns. And I'm going to say wherever there's a space, so if I just go back one, sorry, going too quickly there. So we're looking at a delimited way of splitting. So I want to split it by a character. And I'm going to tick space. And you can scroll down your data, and that's kind of doing what I want. That's getting me the postcode sector first. And I can go finish. And that is going to split all of my postcodes by the space. So this is first half postcode, second half postcode. And I can just have a little scroll down and make sure that's working correctly. So you can see that some of these postcodes are for Stratford, which is a CB37 postcode, and we're starting to see a bit more of a pattern there where we can actually group the ones that are in that postcode sector. So I need to go back to my pivot table and refresh the data, see if that's going to give me those extra columns. So if I've done the columns in the middle of the table, it would have given me those extra columns within here, within my fields to choose from. But because I've done it at the end, it doesn't. So I'm going to right click and delete that pivot table, which we've talked about before. And I'm going to go back to my pivot table data, select it all, and insert pivot table. So don't be afraid of deleting pivot tables when you're finished using them. I'm going to drag and drop client ID, and then I'm going to drag and drop first half of postcode. So I've got some kind of probably spurious results, probably maybe international postcodes, maybe digits or numbers that shouldn't be in that field. I'm going to copy all of that into a new sheet and call that postcode analysis. Don't forget to use the paste values menu so you're not bringing the whole pivot table over with you. And then you can do things like data sort by count of client ID, largest to smallest. The total is going to come up first, so I can get rid of that. So you can see that your first half of your postcode are most likely to be in the CB37 postcode, which is Stratford upon Avon. You've got some blank postcodes to deal with in there, but you've also got CB35, 34, 32, etc. So it's a really good way of analysing postcode data. I'm going to come back to my pivot table and look at a few other things that we can do. So one of the things I could do would be to create a grid. So maybe I want to know customer type, but I actually want to know of each of my customer types how many have signed up to email. So I'm going to drag and drop email data protection into columns rather than rows. And you can see it's going to give me the grid effect of who is a yes to email sign up within each of those groups. So it's a really, really handy tool to sort of look at cross-tabulating your data. We've looked a little bit at dates. Filtering dates works well. The other thing that you can do with dates is just look at analysing it by year, and I tend to do that in a very basic way. There's probably a better way, but I tend to sort these, create a new column and create a year on the new column, and then I'm able to analyse by year. I found it a little bit tricky to analyse by date within here. If I drag and drop last sale date, you know, you just end up with all of the individual sale dates. I could look at filters, so greater than or equal to. So if I look at this year, some of those filters only work if your date is in a certain format, and it depends what database it's come out with. So if I just actually type in 2014, I'm more likely in this instance to get the results that I want, and I can always skip to the bottom and look at the grand total of those if I want to. So one thing I haven't shown you is when you need to change the type of value. At the moment, we've just been counting. We've been counting the customers for all of these things. You might actually have some sales data. So I'm going to go back into my data. I'm going to actually just create some fake sales data. I'm just going to drag to the bottom and fill a series. So obviously this is completely made up, you can see, but let's just look at an example of this being your sales data. So I'm going to get rid of my pivot table again because I've done it in the last column, so it's not going to pick it up if I refresh it. I'm going to select all the data, insert pivot table. And I'm going to drag and drop my sales data field into values. Now what it's doing is it's counting again. So it's giving me really the number of customers, not the cash value. And maybe I want to know by customer type the cash value of each of those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little black triangle here on the right hand side under count of sales data. And I'm going to choose value field settings. And from there I could choose sum, average, max, min, lots of things. Most commonly with sales data, you're going to be looking at the sum. So I'm going to select the sum and press OK. I don't really like the format that's in because it's cash, so I'm going to change that to cash. And now you're starting to see how to use it to analyse monetary values or anything that you want to sum. So whenever you're using pivot tables, just be aware of the difference between counting, summing, averaging, etc. It does try and help you by sort of giving you a label of sum of sales data up there. And obviously then I could do the same thing I've been doing before, which is copy that data out, paste the values from it, you know, put that into a chart, put that into a report, etc. So once I've finished with everything, the most likely thing I'm going to do is to save it all. It's going to take a while because there's 218,000 rows there and it's including a pivot table. So just for future reference, I might want to actually go into my pivot table and just delete it. And then I can copy everything again. So it just depends how fast your system runs. You might find that you're working with small data sets and you've got a lot of capacity and you don't need to do that. But I tend to find that keeping the files smaller is more useful. So I hope that's helped you understand how to use pivot tables.